On a raised plateau above the River Yore lies a unique cluster of Neolithic monuments. Here, about 4,500 years ago, farming communities built three huge identical circular earthwork enclosures, or henges, aligned along the northwest to southeast axis and stretching out over a mile, with each henge around 250 metres in diameter and with banks rising to over 4 metres. Thornborough Henge is heralded as the Stonehenge of the North. Well, here I am, completely in the middle of the henge. The henge are these mounds. And basically what they did was they provided I suppose you'd call it an observatory for those humans so many thousands of years ago. Because you see, deep down here, with the mounds all around, you would have had the perfect observatory for the activity of the stars, the planets, the sun and the moon. And so what, of course, will have happened is that at one point over there, you see you have the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. And when it is its longest, at the summer solstice, you see, it's the longest day, it will exactly align across here. And so therefore, above that point there, those human beings so long ago will know exactly what the longest day was. But conversely, of course, the shortest day would be on the same line going across, and it would be the winter solstice, the shortest day. And of course, that would give them the beginning of their day, their winter. And you'd be able then to chart your year. That's the beginning of the year. And that's how they would be able to map it. So these henges were very important. Whether they were pagan or not, I've no idea. I'm sure they got up to all sorts of shenanigans. The first major monument on the site was built around 3,500 years before Christ. This 1 mile long processional way was aligned so its western end pointed towards the mid-winter setting of Orion. Then, around 3,000 years before Christ, when the three henges at Thornborough were constructed, they appear to have been deliberately laid out to mirror Orion's belt. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm quite fond of going to my back door of an evening and looking up to see what the moon's doing. And one of the constellations I always see is what is known as Orion the Hunter. And it's so easy to spot because you see three bright stars. It's a little bit like the Plough, which is easy to spot, which is like a sort of a cart. But these are three stars that more or less line up. And they're known as Orion's belt. Well, anyway, Orion the Hunter is known also, going right back to the early Babylonians, as the Good Shepherd, or the Heavenly Shepherd, or Anu. But then, of course, there is the Egyptian god, who is known as Osiris, which is perhaps more known to us in the West. He was the enigmatic green-skinned god of rebirth and rejuvenation. Well, I'm glad to be home. I hope you enjoyed that little bimble out to Thornborough Henge. And I will need to tie up some salient points about not only the trip there, but this idea of, which has often been mooted to me recently, that King Charles is the Antichrist, he's the beast. And what is the significance of Charles and 666? Well, I hope to disabuse some of the viewers of some of the ideas they may hold. Now, we've talked so far about, we've talked about Orion. And I was minded of a verse in Scripture which says, "Can you loosen Orion's belt. It comes from the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 31. Can you loosen Orion's belt? So Orion's been around for some time. Well, you'd expect that because he's in the heavenlies and they've been around some time too. But as we saw in Thornborough Henge, Orion is clearly marked upon the earth to give bearings to our ancestors, and to where the sun comes up and the sun goes down, the various planetaries. Thornborough, of course, is just a sort of an observatory, really, because with those raised barrows, as you stand below them, you've got a perfect planetarium almost, a viewing gallery. And so we see Orion, but what on earth has that got to do with King Charles III? Well, let me explain some further. You'll remember in my last video that I talked about the Green Man and how it was front and center on the invitation cards, to some consternation of many folk. Well, I think I rather disabused the viewers on that particular video that had any real strange occultic pagan implications other than that of rejuvenation and Charles's interest in the environment, etc. But let's go back to Orion, because of course Orion has certain corollaries with the Green Man. They are actually one and the same. Now, one of the things you have to notice about Orion, that he has a club. And there's another character which also has a club, which I'm going to mention in a minute. But before I do, let's just get on to this 666 business. Because a lot of people have notified me that the coronation date, which was on May the 6th, the original pagan festival of May Day, and why did Charles choose it? And they drew a corollary between the two, of Charles' credentials as a pagan, possibly why he chose the date. But then people went further, and they realized that the coronation date of King Charles III was exactly 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days from the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. That gave us 666, and of course alarm bells rang. But there's one more obvious reason why Charles was coronated on that date, was because one of his antecedents, King George V, was coronated also on the feast of Belenus, the original May Day pagan festival. So he may have wanted to just mark his admiration for his great-great-grandfather. Now, what is very interesting is that the father of George V, of course, was responsible for a green man, for a wild man, for an Orion. Now, how is that, you might say? Well, I want you to take a look at the crest of the Empress of Denmark, Alexandria, who went on to marry King Edward VII. Here's the crest. And who do we see? None other than the wild man. Notice the club. And what does Orion hold in his hand? Oh yes, a club. Now, you'll also see on the wild man that he has a wreath of acorns. I've got a wreath of acorns here, but I don't intend to put it on my head. And therefore, that ties again in with the Green Man himself, because the Green Man, of course, was a wreath of often oak leaves and acorns, through which a man would put his head on the May Day festivals, the original pagan festival. So we've now got a corollary between 3 characters. We've got Orion, we've got the Wild Man, and we've got the Green Man. And actually, mythologically speaking, in folklore, they're really all the same chap, because the Wild Man, in a sense, and Orion and the Green Man are all picturing regeneration and rejuvenation. There is a tie between them all. Now, in this coat of arms of the Empress Alexandra, the wild man is clearly to be seen. And of course, he disappears then again from all our modern day heraldic blazing of arms and achievements of arms, as they're called, I think. But nevertheless, there is a correlation between them all. But what is most interesting, of course, is that the name of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which was the original name of our royal family, was changed to Windsor. And that was done by George V. And that was done in 1917. Now, you may say, is there any kind of pagan etymology with the name Windsor? Not at all. It's just where Windsor happened to be situated. And it's just a name they plucked out of the air, really, because of Windsor Castle. And so, really, let's tie up some thoughts. We have the Green Man, we have Orion, we have the Wild Man. We have the date of May the 6th for the coronation of George V and King Charles III. We have already established in my previous video that that was the original pagan date for May Day. It wasn't May the 1st. It was when you had the dissection between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. Always appears on the 6th, sometimes the 5th, depending on how fast the Earth is spinning. But they both chose that date, and of course that date is sometimes called the Feast of Belinus, which was the fire god, Belinus, the Gaelic god, deity. And that always appeared then. May Festival was called Bellatine, from the fire god Belinus. And that is part of Gaelic mythology and Irish history. But I don't think any of this has any relevance in the sense that I think he was just really wanting to have his coronation on the same day as his great-great-grandfather. But people will look into it more closely and say, well, what does this mean? Does this mean he's a pagan? Does it mean he's the Antichrist? I think I've already dismissed the idea of 666 having anything to do with Charles per se being the beast. But what one could say is that he is a perennialist. Now, perennialism is quite interesting. He's not so far this way that you might describe him as a pagan, and he's not so much that way that you might call him a wonderful Orthodox Christian. He's a perennialist, and there are a number of perennialists about, and some people might say even our present Pope is a perennialist, for reasons I shall now describe, and that is because perennialism is more or less saying that eternal truths can be derived at from sacred numerology, from sacred and divine geometry, from esoteric knowledge encoded within nature and the universe, and that all of these can be discerned in every major world religion and philosophical school. This is a belief of many people. I'm not quite saying that all roads lead to heaven, but that certainly they all share common denominators. So we can say, with I think some confidence, that he is something of a perennialist given his interests in nature, sustainability, the ecology, landscaping, divine mathematics, proportions of buildings and architecture. And it ties in with his ideas of Belinus, if you like, in terms of the god of rejuvenation and regeneration. All this greenery. There's some greenery behind me here. Not going to stick it on my head, as I said. But there are various tie-ins. So I think we can say with some confidence he does share a perennialist view. My views on the subject are simply this, to end the video, is that I don't believe he is the beast. I don't believe he's the Antichrist. I think the 666 is, I think that is entirely irrelevant to the conversation. It is interesting, of course, that it did tie in with the date 666, 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days after the funeral of his mother, but I don't think that was entirely why he chose it. And so to wrap up, my stance on this as a Christian, and clearly as a priest, is that I don't believe that divine truth is arrived at by sacred geometry or numerology, but I believe that truth comes into this world by one man, and that man is Jesus Christ. And God sent him into the world. It was an act of supernatural intervention. And that divine truth, divine doctrine, is arrived at not by studying numbers. It's not esoteric, it's very open. Christ came openly into the world and manifested himself openly to the world. It is not about secrets. It's not about private clubs. It's not about occultic hidden knowledge. It's not about that form of esotericism that relies on knowing secret things. That is a heresy we call Gnosticism, and it's to be found continually in our modern day amongst the Masons and others. So, yes, he is a perennialist, but whether he's a Christian, I think I'll leave that up to you to decide. Anyway, I hope you've liked this short video and my little trip out to Thornborough. I'm going to leave you with some more of Thornborough as I munch on my lunch. But if you've enjoyed this video or found any of it informative, do feel free to subscribe. It'd be marvellous. I've had so many recently new subscribers. It's quite thrilling. So do that if you like, or give it a thumbs up. And also in the comments, if you've got some observations you'd like to make, I'd be very glad to hear them. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the video, and I'm going to finish my cup of tea. God bless. See you on the next video.
The maiden took the tiny flower and nursed it with her tears. Lo, he who left her in that hour came not in after years. Until a hero's death he rode, mid shower of fire and shot. But in the maiden's heart abode the flower, forget-me-not.